I was branded a failure in my own home, until her best friend exposed the truth, and I finally took back respect, boundaries, and my marriage. We were going to compete in the most ridiculous contest I'd ever heard of. Who could care less about the other person? The morning she announced this brilliant idea, I was drinking my coffee and reading the news like any other Wednesday. She walked into the kitchen, looked me dead in the eye, and said we were starting this game today. No discussion, no explanation of why, just a declaration of war disguised as indifference. At first, I thought she was joking, but when she walked past me like I was a piece of furniture and left her breakfast dishes on the counter, I realized she was dead serious. This wasn't about cleaning or household chores. This was about power. She wanted to see who would crack first, who would beg for attention, who would lose their dignity trying to win back the other person's interest. Wrong move. She picked the wrong guy for this particular game. The first thing I noticed was how calculated everything became. She stopped greeting me when I came home from work. No more casual conversations about her day. When I tried to talk to her about normal stuff, she would give me one-word answers or just walk away. She left the living room whenever I entered, started eating her meals at different times, even moved to sleep on the couch without saying anything about it. I watched all this happen and realized something important. She expected me to chase her. She wanted me to ask what was wrong, to plead with her to stop this nonsense, to show her that I needed her attention so badly that I'd humiliate myself to get it back. That's what this whole thing was designed for. She wanted to feel powerful by making me feel desperate. But here's what she didn't count on. I don't beg, I don't chase, and I definitely don't play games where the rules are designed to make me look weak. So instead of panicking or trying to fix whatever imaginary problem had triggered this behavior, I did something that completely threw her off balance. I adapted fast. Day 1, when she left her dishes in the sink, I washed only mine. When she ignored my greeting, I stopped greeting her too. When she acted like I didn't exist, I returned the favor with interest. But the difference was, I wasn't playing her game. I was playing my own version, and in my version, I actually won by not caring. The change in my routine was immediate and obvious. I started cooking only for myself. I did my own laundry separately. I cleaned only the spaces I used. I organized my schedule around what I wanted to do, not around accommodating someone who was pretending I didn't matter to them. What she didn't realize was that this forced independence felt surprisingly good. For months, maybe years, I'd been operating on autopilot, coming home, asking about her day, sharing responsibilities, doing the same routine. Now suddenly, I had complete freedom to do whatever I wanted, without having to consider her feelings or preferences. By day 2, I could see the first cracks in her strategy. She kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking, testing to see if I was miserable yet, waiting for signs that I was struggling with her rejection. But what she saw instead was a man who seemed perfectly fine with the new arrangement. I started staying out longer after work, not because I was trying to make her jealous or worried, but because I genuinely enjoyed having the freedom to grab dinner wherever I wanted, stop by the bookstore, or just drive around listening to music without having to text updates or worry about someone else's schedule. When I came home those first few nights, she was clearly waiting to see if I'd try to start a conversation, or ask where the relationship was heading. Instead, I'd nod politely if we crossed paths, then head to my office or the garage to work on projects I'd been putting off for months. The silence in the house was supposed to bother me. She wanted it to feel uncomfortable and tense, so I'd break first. But honestly, the quiet was peaceful. No passive-aggressive comments, no subtle criticisms, no need to navigate someone else's mysterious mood changes, just calm, predictable silence. By day 3, her confidence was starting to waver. I could tell because her indifference was becoming more forced and obvious. She was trying too hard to ignore me, which meant she was thinking about me constantly. Meanwhile, I was genuinely focused on other things. That's when I understood the fundamental flaw in her strategy. She was competing in a contest where caring less was supposed to be difficult, but she'd accidentally created a situation where not caring was actually the easier, more comfortable option. She'd freed me from having to manage her emotions, or guess what she wanted from me. This wasn't going to end the way she planned. Days 4 and 5 brought out her heavy artillery. She wasn't just ignoring me anymore. She was actively trying to make my life inconvenient. The coffee maker mysteriously ran out of coffee and wasn't refilled. The thermostat got adjusted to temperatures that would make a penguin uncomfortable. She started using both parking spots in our driveway, forcing me to park on the street. But the real escalation came when she decided to redecorate our shared spaces without any discussion. I came home to find the living room furniture completely rearranged. Not improved, just different. The couch was now facing away from the TV. The coffee table was pushed against the wall, and my reading chair had been moved to the most awkward corner of the room. Most guys would have seen this as a declaration of war. They would have moved everything back, started an argument, or demanded an explanation. But I saw it for what it really was, desperation. She was running out of ways to get a reaction from me, so she was getting more aggressive with her tactics. My response was simple and devastating. I rearranged my office to be even more comfortable than before. I brought in a small refrigerator, a coffee maker, and a comfortable chair. Essentially, I created my own living space that didn't require me to use any of the areas she'd claimed as her territory. The message was clear without me having to say a word. You want to control the common areas? Fine. I don't need them. She noticed the changes immediately. I caught her standing in the doorway of my office, staring at my new setup with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it anger? Confusion? Fear? Probably all three. She was starting to realize that her tactics weren't just failing, they were backfiring spectacularly. Day 5 brought the passive-aggressive comments. Little remarks dropped into the silence like grenades. Comments about how some people apparently had money to waste on unnecessary appliances. Observations about how nice it must be to have so much free time to reorganize. Sarcastic compliments about my new independence. Each comment was designed to start a fight. She wanted me to defend myself, to argue back, to engage with her on any level. But I had a better strategy. I treated her comments like weather reports, interesting information that didn't require a response from me. When she made a snide remark about my coffee maker, I just nodded and said, "Good coffee is important." When she commented on my spending, I agreed that financial responsibility was valuable. When she questioned my new routine, I thanked her for noticing the positive changes I was making. This approach was destroying her strategy because it removed all the emotional charge from her attacks. She couldn't start a fight with someone who refused to fight back. She couldn't make me defensive about choices I was genuinely happy with. By the end of day 5, she was clearly frustrated. Her attempts to ignore me were becoming more theatrical. She would make a big show of leaving the room when I entered. She started slamming things louder than necessary. She began having phone conversations in common areas where she knew I could hear her, talking about how great her life was and how she didn't need anyone else to be happy. But here's what she didn't realize. Her behavior was making my life easier, not harder. Every time she avoided a room I was in, I got to enjoy that space in peace. Every time she made plans that didn't include me, I got to make my own plans without having to negotiate or compromise. Every time she demonstrated her independence, she gave me permission to be more independent too. I started reaching out to friends I hadn't talked to in months, made plans for the weekend that had nothing to do with her schedule, signed up for a woodworking class I'd been interested in, started reading books that had been sitting on my shelf for years. The irony was beautiful. In her effort to make me feel excluded and unimportant, she'd accidentally given me the space and freedom to rediscover parts of myself that I'd forgotten about. I was becoming a more interesting, more fulfilled person because of her rejection. On day 6, something shifted in her approach. The theatrical indifference was replaced by something more calculating. She started leaving things around the house that were clearly meant to provoke me. Bills that needed to be paid, but only in places where I'd have to ask her about them. Her clothes scattered in areas that forced me to acknowledge the mess she was creating. But the most obvious attempt at manipulation came when she started getting dressed up for no apparent reason. Full makeup, nice clothes, expensive perfume, all for trips to the grocery store or coffee shop. She'd make sure I saw her looking her best before she left, then stay out for hours without explaining where she'd been. I watched all of this with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. She was trying every manipulation technique in the book, and none of them were working because I wasn't responding the way her playbook said I should. Instead of getting jealous about her mysterious outings, I used the quiet time to work on my projects. Instead of asking about the bills, I handled my own financial responsibilities and left hers alone. Instead of commenting on her appearance, I focused on my own health and started working out more consistently. Day 6 ended with her looking more frustrated and exhausted than I'd seen her in years. Her game was supposed to make me miserable, but she was the one who seemed stressed and unhappy. Meanwhile, I was sleeping better, eating better, and feeling more confident than I had in months. She was losing her own competition, and we both knew it. Day 7 was when everything flipped. She woke up that morning and found me already dressed and heading out the door with a gym bag. No explanation, no schedule shared. Just a polite nod as I grabbed my keys. The look on her face was priceless, pure confusion mixed with something that looked suspiciously like panic. See, she'd spent 6 days trying to make me feel excluded from her life. But she never considered that I might actually start excluding her from mine. The idea that I could have plans, interests, and activities that didn't revolve around her hadn't entered her calculations. I spent that morning at the gym, then met up with my buddy from work for lunch. We talked about normal guy stuff, sports, work projects, life in general. It felt incredible to have a conversation that wasn't loaded with hidden meanings or emotional landmines, just straight talk between two people who respected each other. When I got home that afternoon, she was waiting. Not obviously waiting, but positioned in the kitchen where she'd have a clear view of me coming through the door. She was pretending to be busy with something, but I could feel her attention focused entirely on me. The questions started immediately, but disguised as casual observations. Comments about how I seemed to be out a lot lately, wondering aloud about my new routine, asking if I'd eaten, but in a way that was fishing for information about where I'd been and who I'd been with. My responses were friendly but completely uninformative. Yes, I'd eaten. Yes, I'd had a good day. Yes, I was planning to stay busy. Nothing she could argue with, nothing she could turn into a conflict, but also nothing that satisfied her obvious curiosity about my new independence. That evening, she made her first major strategic error. She tried to create artificial intimacy by suggesting we watch a movie together, not asking directly, but positioning herself on the couch with the remote and making comments about how there were some good shows available. A weaker man would have jumped at this opportunity. Finally, a chance to reconnect. Finally, she was showing interest in spending time together. Finally, the Cold War was ending. But I saw it for what it was, a test. She wanted to see if I was desperate enough for her attention that I'd abandon my new boundaries. The moment she offered the smallest crumb of affection, she was checking whether I'd been genuinely building independence, or just waiting for her to invite me back into her world. So, I thanked her for the suggestion but explained that I had other plans for the evening. I was going to work on a project in the garage, then read for a while before bed, maybe another time. The disappointment on her face was immediate and obvious, but more than disappointment, there was something else, fear. She was starting to realize that her rejection hadn't made me more eager for her approval, it had made me genuinely less interested in seeking it. Day 8 brought desperation disguised as aggression. She started picking fights about things that had nothing to do with our competition, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the temperature I kept my office, the fact that I'd been using more hot water lately because of my new workout routine. Each complaint was actually a bid for attention. She'd rather have negative interaction than no interaction at all. But I treated every criticism like helpful feedback from a roommate, thanked her for the input, made reasonable adjustments where appropriate, and refused to get emotionally invested in any of it. This drove her absolutely crazy. You can't have a satisfying fight with someone who won't fight back. You can't feel powerful when your attacks are met with politeness and accommodation. She was trying to start a war, and I kept responding with diplomatic solutions. The breaking point came when she accused me of not caring about our home because I wasn't arguing with her about household management. She wanted me to defend my choices, to explain my reasoning, to engage in the kind of back and forth that would prove I was still emotionally invested in her opinions. Instead, I agreed with her. I said she was absolutely right, that we seemed to have different approaches to managing our living space, and maybe it would be better if we each took responsibility for our own areas going forward. Problem solved. No drama required. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. I was supposed to fight for our shared responsibilities, insist that we work together, demand that she treat our marriage like a partnership. But why would I demand partnership from someone who'd spent over a week demonstrating that she didn't want to be my partner? Why would I fight for shared decision-making with someone who'd made it clear she preferred making unilateral choices about our life together? Day 9 was quiet in a way that felt different from the previous week. She'd stopped trying to provoke me because it wasn't working. She'd stopped ignoring me because I wasn't chasing her attention anyway. She'd stopped testing me because I'd already passed every test by refusing to participate in her grading system. Instead, she started watching me, really watching, studying my routine, my mood, my level of satisfaction with the new arrangement. And what she saw was probably the last thing she'd expected to see. I was thriving, not just surviving her rejection, but actually flourishing because of it. I was more productive, more social, more confident, and more content than I'd been in months. The competition she designed to break me down had accidentally built me up. That night, she made the first genuine attempt at normal conversation we'd had since this whole thing started. She asked about my day, not to fish for information, but because she seemed genuinely curious about my life. She commented on how good I looked, how much energy I seemed to have, how relaxed I appeared. I responded naturally and warmly, but without any desperation or eagerness. I was happy to talk with her, but I didn't need to talk with her. There's a huge difference, and she could feel it. By the end of day 9, the dynamic had completely reversed. She was the one seeking interaction, and I was the one who was perfectly fine with or without it. She was the one who seemed anxious about our relationship, and I was the one who felt secure in my own life, regardless of her participation in it. Her competition was supposed to show her which one of us needed the other more. Mission accomplished, just not the way she'd planned. Day 10 was supposed to be the end of her brilliant experiment, but she was panicking. The results weren't what she'd expected, and she was scrambling to change the outcome before time ran out. That's when people make their biggest mistakes, and she made several. The morning started with her first attempt at manufactured jealousy. She brought up a CEO worker of mine, asking casual questions about whether I'd been talking to anyone interesting lately. Then she mentioned how she'd run into some old friend of ours who'd asked about me specifically, all delivered with fake innocence, but the message was clear. She wanted to know if I was talking to other women. The irony was delicious. After 10 days of treating me like I was invisible, she was suddenly concerned about who else might be noticing me. After a week and a half of demonstrating her complete lack of interest in my life, she was fishing for information about my social connections. My response was perfectly honest and completely unsatisfying to her. Yes, I'd been having more conversations with people lately. Yes, it was nice to reconnect with friends and colleagues. Yes, I was enjoying being more social. No elaboration, no reassurance, no jealousy-soothing details. She clearly wanted me to either deny talking to anyone else or provide enough information for her to feel secure about my activities. Instead, she got confirmation that I had a social life that didn't include her and didn't require her approval. The second mistake came when she tried to use guilt. She started making comments about how distant I'd become, how we barely spoke anymore, how sad it was that we were living like strangers. Each comment was designed to make me feel responsible for the state of our relationship. But here's the thing about guilt. It only works when you actually did something wrong. And what exactly had I done wrong? Responded to her game by playing it better than she did, adapted to her rules faster than she'd expected, refused to beg for attention from someone who was withholding it deliberately. So, when she tried to guilt me about our lack of communication, I reminded her gently that she'd been the one who stopped talking to me first. When she complained about feeling like strangers, I pointed out that she'd been treating me like a stranger for over a week. When she said I seemed distant, I agreed that distance had become our new normal. Each response was delivered without anger or defensiveness, which made them impossible to argue with. She couldn't accuse me of being hostile when I was perfectly calm. She couldn't say I was being unfair when I was simply stating facts. She couldn't claim I was overreacting when I wasn't reacting emotionally at all. Her third and biggest mistake was trying to use sarcasm as a weapon. She started making cutting remarks about my new lifestyle, comments about how nice it must be to have no responsibilities to anyone else, observations about how some people could just ignore their commitments when things got inconvenient, jokes about my sudden independence. This was where I decided to give her a small taste of her own medicine, but with better execution. When she made a sarcastic comment about my freedom, I thanked her sincerely for helping me discover it. When she joked about my independence, I agreed that it had been a valuable learning experience. When she criticized my lack of responsibilities, I acknowledged that focusing on my own life had been incredibly productive. But then I took it one step further. I started asking questions that turned her sarcasm back on itself. When she commented on my freedom, I asked if she was feeling restricted somehow. When she mentioned my independence, I wondered if she was feeling too dependent on others. When she criticized my focus on my own life, I asked if she was unhappy with hers. The effect was immediate and devastating. Her sarcasm was supposed to make me feel defensive and guilty. Instead, my responses made her examine her own dissatisfaction. She was trying to attack my choices, and I was highlighting the problems with hers. By midday, she was clearly frustrated with how badly her tactics were failing. She tried a direct approach, asking me outright if I was happy with how things had been going between us. It was a loaded question designed to force me into either admitting I was miserable or confessing that I didn't care about our relationship. My answer was honest and brutal in its simplicity. I told her that the last 10 days had been very educational. I'd learned a lot about my own capabilities and preferences. I discovered that I was more adaptable than I'd realized, I'd found out that I could be perfectly content with a lot less drama and emotional manipulation in my daily life. Notice what I didn't say. I didn't say I was happy or unhappy with our relationship. I didn't say I wanted things to continue or change. I didn't give her any emotional ammunition to work with. I just described my experience in neutral terms that left her with no clear target to attack. The conversation ended with her looking more confused and frustrated than ever. She tried guilt, jealousy, sarcasm, and direct confrontation. Nothing had worked because I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was playing a completely different game where her attacks weren't relevant to my objectives. That afternoon, she made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She announced that she was going out for the evening with friends and wouldn't be back until late. This was supposed to make me jealous, worried, or at least curious about her plans. Instead, I thanked her for letting me know and mentioned that I had plans too. Nothing dramatic or mysterious, just a quiet evening working on my projects and maybe calling my brother to catch up. Her announcement was supposed to disrupt my evening, but it actually made it better by guaranteeing I'd have the house to myself. The look on her face when she realized her threat had backfired was almost comical. She'd expected questions, demands, or at least some sign that I cared about her mysterious evening plans. What she got was polite acknowledgement and a clear indication that I had better things to do than worry about her social calendar. When she left that evening, I could see her watching me through the window as she backed out of the driveway. She was looking for signs of distress, loneliness, or regret. What she saw was a man settling in comfortably for a peaceful evening at home. Day 10 wasn't over yet, but the competition clearly was. She'd lost, and we both knew it. She came home that night at almost midnight, clearly expecting to find me waking up, worried about where she'd been or what she'd been doing. Instead, she found the house quiet, my car in the driveway, and me sound asleep in our bed like nothing unusual had happened. I heard her moving around the house, opening and closing doors more loudly than necessary, checking to see if I was really asleep or just pretending. But the truth was, I'd had a genuinely good evening and had gone to bed at my normal time because I had a full day planned for tomorrow. Her late arrival was just background noise to my peaceful night. The next morning brought day 11, which wasn't supposed to exist according to her original 10-day plan, but she'd painted herself into a corner. The competition was officially over, but she couldn't declare victory because she'd obviously lost. She couldn't call it a draw because the results were too lopsided, and she couldn't admit defeat because that would mean acknowledging that her entire strategy had backfired. So she pretended the competition was still ongoing, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. The theatrical indifference was gone, replaced by genuine uncertainty about how to interact with me. She'd spent so much energy on her performance that she'd forgotten how to have normal conversations. I decided to give her a gift that morning, not because I felt sorry for her, but because I was curious to see how she'd handle genuine kindness after 10 days of manufactured conflict. I made coffee for both of us and left her cup in the usual spot with a simple note that said, "Good morning." Her reaction was immediate and telling. She stared at the coffee cup like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Was this a peace offering? A manipulation tactic? A sign that I was finally cracking under the pressure of her rejection? She couldn't figure out my angle because there wasn't one. It was just coffee. When she finally drank it, I could see her trying to decide how to respond, thank me, and risk looking like she was giving up her position. Ignore it and risk seeming ungrateful. Make a sarcastic comment and risk starting another failed confrontation. She chose the safest option and said nothing. But her entire demeanor changed. The aggressive edge was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. She was starting to realize that she had no idea what came next. That afternoon, she made the mistake that revealed everything. She tried to test me one more time but chose the worst possible approach. She started a conversation about our future plans, asking about things like vacation ideas and home improvement projects. Topics that required us to think as a partnership. The trap was obvious. If I engaged enthusiastically, she could claim that I'd been secretly miserable during our competition and was desperate to get back to normal. If I seemed disinterested, she could accuse me of not caring about our shared life. Either way, she thought she'd finally found a way to put me on the defensive. But I had a third option that she hadn't considered. I told her the truth. I explained that the last 10 days had given me a lot of clarity about what I wanted from a relationship. I'd learned that I could be happy and fulfilled whether we were acting like partners or like roommates. I discovered that I didn't need her approval or attention to feel good about myself. I'd realized that I was perfectly capable of making plans and decisions independently. Then I said something that I could see hit her like a physical blow. I told her that going forward, I was interested in being with someone who actually wanted to be with me, not someone who was testing me, manipulating me, or trying to prove points about power and control. Someone who chose to be in my life because they enjoyed it, not because they were stuck with it. The silence that followed was deafening. She'd spent 10 days trying to make me feel insecure about her interest in me, and I just told her that her interest wasn't enough anymore. I needed her enthusiasm, her genuine participation, her actual partnership, not her grudging presence or conditional affection. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. She asked what that meant for us. Was I saying I didn't want to be married anymore? Was I threatening to leave? Was I giving her an ultimatum? My answer was probably the most terrifying thing she could have heard. I told her I wasn't threatening anything. I was just explaining my new standards. She was free to meet them or not, but I wasn't going to lower them to accommodate someone who didn't want to be there. The power dynamic had completely flipped. For 10 days, she'd held all the cards, deciding when to engage, when to withdraw, when to test me, when to punish me. Now, I was the one setting terms, and she was the one who had to decide whether to accept them. That evening, she tried a different approach. She started talking about the competition like it had been a mutual experiment that we'd both participated in equally. She suggested that maybe we'd both learn something valuable about independence and partnership. She tried to frame the whole thing as a relationship-building exercise that had strengthened us both. I listened politely, but I didn't agree with her revised history. I reminded her that she'd started this competition without my input or consent. I'd simply adapted to the rules she'd imposed. If she'd learned something valuable, that was great, but she shouldn't expect me to pretend that her behavior had been reasonable or fair. The conversation ended with her looking more vulnerable than I'd seen her since this whole thing started. She was finally beginning to understand that her actions had consequences she hadn't anticipated. She'd wanted to make me feel powerless, and instead she'd made herself irrelevant. As we went to bed that night, I could feel her watching me, trying to gauge my mood, my intentions, my level of commitment to our relationship. But I wasn't giving her anything to analyze. I was just living my life day by day, making decisions based on what felt right for me. Day 12 was about to begin, and for the first time since this competition started, she had no idea what to expect. Day 12 started with her cooking breakfast, not just for herself, but for both of us. She set the table with actual plates instead of eating standing over the sink. She even put out the nice napkins we usually save for company. The message was clear without her having to say anything. She was surrendering. But surrender wasn't enough anymore. I'd moved beyond needing her to stop the competition. I needed her to understand why it should never have started in the first place. When she offered me breakfast with a hopeful smile, I thanked her politely, but explained that I'd already eaten. This wasn't a rejection of her peace offering, just a statement of fact. I'd gotten used to managing my own schedule and didn't need her to take care of my meals anymore. The disappointment on her face was immediate, but there was something else there too, recognition. She was starting to understand that the independence I developed wasn't just a temporary response to her game. It was a permanent upgrade to how I operated. Over the next few days, she tried various approaches to re-establish our old dynamic. She asked for my help with decisions she'd been making independently for weeks. She suggested activities we could do together. She started conversations about shared responsibilities and future plans. Each attempt was met with the same response: light interest, reasonable cooperation, but no desperate eagerness to return to our previous patterns. I was willing to be her partner, but I was no longer willing to be her dependent. The breaking point came on day 15 when she finally asked the question that had been building for days. She wanted to know if I still loved her, not if I was attracted to her, not if I wanted to stay married, not if I was happy with her. She wanted to know about love specifically. My answer was carefully considered and devastatingly honest. I told her that love wasn't the issue. I'd loved her before the competition, during it, and I loved her now. But love without respect was just emotional attachment. Love without partnership was just comfortable familiarity. Love without mutual consideration was just habit. I explained that her competition had shown me the difference between loving someone and needing them. I loved her, but I didn't need her anymore. And that meant she had to earn her place in my life through her actions, not just expect it because of my feelings. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in years. She admitted that she'd started the competition because she felt taken for granted. She wanted to feel important, valuable, necessary. She wanted proof that I couldn't live without her. I told her that she'd gotten her proof, just not the kind she'd wanted. She'd proven that I could live without her manipulation, tests, her emotional games. She'd shown me that I was strong enough to be alone and confident enough to maintain my standards, even when she was testing them. Here's what she hadn't proven. She hadn't shown me that life was better with her in it. She hadn't demonstrated that she brought value to our partnership beyond just being present. She hadn't given me any reason to choose her over the peace and independence I discovered. That's when I gave her the challenge that would determine our future. I told her that if she wanted to be my wife, not just someone who happened to be married to me, she needed to show me why I should want that. Not through guilt, manipulation, or emotional pressure, through genuine partnership, respect, and consideration. I wasn't asking her to chase me or prove her love through grand gestures. I was asking her to be the kind of person that someone would choose to build a life with. Someone who added value instead of creating drama. Someone who solved problems instead of creating them. The change in her behavior was immediate and dramatic. She stopped testing me and started supporting me. She stopped creating problems and started solving them. She stopped demanding attention and started earning it through her actions. But the most important change was in how she communicated. She stopped using guilt, sarcasm, and passive aggression as tools. She started saying what she meant directly and honestly. She stopped trying to manipulate my emotions and started respecting my autonomy. Within a month, we had a completely different relationship. Not because I'd forgiven her for the competition, but because she'd become someone worth being married to. She'd learned that respect wasn't something she could take for granted. And I'd learned that love without respect wasn't worth having. The competition she'd started to prove her importance had ended up proving mine instead. She'd wanted to make me desperate for her attention, but she'd made herself desperate for my approval. The power dynamic had permanently shifted, and we both knew it. But here's the thing about real power. When you have it, you don't need to abuse it. I didn't use my new position to punish her or make her feel insecure. I used it to create the kind of relationship I actually wanted, one based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and honest communication. She learned that testing your partner's loyalty is a dangerous game because you might not like the results. I learned that my own happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval or participation. Together, we learned that a relationship is only as strong as the respect between the people in it. The competition was over, but the real relationship was just beginning. And this time, we were both playing to win together instead of trying to defeat each other. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.